I'd like to start, if we may, just on those trade negotiations. We're now less than 2 weeks away from that deadline from the United States. Do you expect that the European Union will get a deal with the United States before August the 1st?
Well, we're working hard on it, and of course we need a deal. I think it's in the best interest of both countries, both nations. But we'll see. We saw it being postponed before, so yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. So in any sort of negotiation, there's always the stick and the carrot side of things. I know that everyone has been playing more on the sort of carrot end of things, not to upset the Trump administration. In this sort of last 2 weeks of these negotiations, does the EU need to take a slightly harder stand to demonstrate the kind of pain that this would cause the United States? For example, the anti-coercion instrument, is that something that the Dutch would favor potentially putting on the table and potentially looking at U.S. services as well?
Well, all the time we're saying we need a deal. We need to de-escalate, and free trade is in the best interest of both. So that's what we're working on, but the European Union cannot sit still. So if we don't have a deal, we are forced to retaliate. I keep expressing it's not what we want, but it's on the table. And I'm not going into specifics right now because we're in the middle of the negotiations. But Europe is a large trade bloc, and once again, we cannot sit still.
And of course, the Dutch sort of sit at the sort of center of global trade in many respects, but also at the center of the world of semiconductors and chips, with ASML, the great champion, being a Dutch company, one of the biggest companies in Europe. What are your concerns around what we're hearing about tariffs potentially in the world of chips? What has your kind of contact been with the United States about potentially looking for carve-outs for chips? And what are you sort of trying to lobby the EU to speak on your behalf on the question of semiconductors?
Well, we're not in direct contact to the Netherlands and the United States administration. Everything goes to Brussels, to the European Commission. So we are united in this, and of course we fight for the interests of the Dutch economy. ASML is a big part of that. It's an important company. It's also an important company for the United States, of course. Yeah. So that's what we keep expressing.
And so what are you, so in kind of lobbying, because obviously every member state has its input to kind of the message that Brussels brings to the United States, what would you like to be part of that message on the question of semiconductors?
Well, I'm not going to specific on semiconductors, but what we keep saying is like we need free trade. Free trade is in the best interest. Tariffs don't work, and if you are concerned about your trade deficit, you need fiscal consolidation, and you don't need tariffs. It's just a tax on American consumers. It will increase inflation. It's a bad thing, and that's what we keep expressing.
And one of the concerns that we've had in Europe is with the trade barriers between the United States and China elevating, a lot of that capacity coming over into Europe, which is really the only market that's comparable to the U.S. at absorbing some of that capacity. That, of course, threatens some of the competitiveness, which is one of the great priorities of the European Union at the moment. Do we need higher trade barriers with China in Europe in order to prevent that from happening?
Well, of course, we don't want dumping from Chinese products on the European market, which is going to hurt us again. And the United States is then concerned that the surplus in Europe will go to the United States. So this is an example that trade wars is not in the interest of anybody. So, but the European Commission is monitoring this very closely.
The European Commission has also put out a proposal for a budget that we got a couple of days ago. 2 trillion euros is the figure. We've had displeasure aired from Berlin. We've spoken to the Swedish finance minister here as well, who has had an issue with that figure. Is 2 trillion too high?
It's too high, and this proposal is dead on arrival.
Okay, how high? Too high by how much?
That I'm not going into, but for us, the Netherlands, I keep saying we need a smaller budget, not a bigger project, which means we need to reprioritize within the budget. And I don't think it's we should start with who can we tax, how can we spend more. We need to spend less, and that counts for both sides of the Atlantic.
Yeah, and I'd like to get your view also particularly on the corporate taxes that have been suggested by the EU, particularly in the spirit of this competitiveness that they're also trying to put forward. Your stance on that?
Well, of course, I'm not in favor of that one. But once again, I don't want to start a discussion about who can we tax. The discussion should be about the budget, how can we reprioritize, and how can we spend less. And the starting point can never be to tax, and especially specifically not companies.
And so the sort of volume, the number is one side of it. The other question is also priorities. Are you broadly aligned with the priorities of the EU budget? Where would you like to see the sort of money shifted, not just in terms of its volume, but in its concentration within the priorities?
Well, we have new priorities. So security is, of course, a very important one. Innovation is a very important one. So these are the areas money should go to. But we are now at the starting point of negotiations. It will take 2 years. So I don't want to go ahead of things. But I think the position of the Netherlands is quite clear.
And on the question of defense, there's 100 billion euros that has been planned for Ukraine. Are you in favor, at least, of that part of the budget?
Yeah. So we need to keep supporting Ukraine. That goes both military military support, budgetary support, and of course keeping pressure on Russia and putting extra sanctions on Russia.
And we heard from Donald Trump a little bit earlier saying that he's willing to sell more weapons to Ukraine if NATO and Europe pays for it. I'd like to get an understanding of what the Dutch's role is going to be in that. How much of that will come from a national budget? Do you see that being potentially done at the EU level? How are you thinking about that?
Well, actually, this is being discussed right now, so I'm talking about this with my colleagues in the European Union. How can we organize this? But I'm very glad to hear from President Trump that he continues his support also for Ukraine. Of course, there's also a monetary point in that. So who's going to pay for that bill? I think it's clear that Europe should pay for it, and how is now part of the discussions we're having among each other.
And I'd like to just get a flavor of some of the meetings that you've had here at the G20 with a lot of different sort of finance ministers, central bank governors, and this idea of multilateralism, this architecture that was really brought in by the United States, which the United States is basically now absent from. Bessent is not here, for example. Well, how is that changing the sort of conversations that you're having in these rooms? How is it reordering, in your mind, kind of the arrangement of multilateralism across the world?
Yeah, well, actually, everybody's quite vocal about the importance of free trade. So that's a good side of this discussion, that now everybody speaks out in favor of free trade, that we need less tariffs. So actually, we're quite united in this.